Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts across the internet, including theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, I think. I'm doing well. A little annoyed at the fellow who decided to tweet the Brett Favre funeral game at me earlier. It's like whenever what did it say on that? It was like whenever I see this, I think of Big Mono.
Yeah, whenever I see this, I think of Big Mono. So yeah, fantastic.
Thanks for reminding me of me losing my perfect season in fantasy. That didn't ruin my day at all, I promise you. It was the entire video of all the Favre catches too. That's what the Twitter video was. And I was like, oh, what is it? Oh, that's tragic. It's been a weird thing on Twitter this week. Vikings Twitter is a little weird after the victory. I had posted something about if you're not following Baldy NFL on Twitter, he did a great breakdown of the all 22 rather, even when all 22 was all messed up. He did this great video breakdown, and I had said, if you're not following Baldy NFL on Twitter, what exactly are you using the medium for other than to start random fights online looking in your general direction, Arif? And some guy DM'd my personal account with this rant about how I need to be nicer to Arif, and
I'm a big fan of this guy. Yeah, no, he's right, man.
How is this a thing? Is my absolute just disturbing hatred for you this clear? I thought I at least had a bit of a mask over it.
No, I mean it's a good general rule: be nicer to Arif.
This is a terrible rule
all the time.
No, yeah, this is a terrible rule. I cannot endorse this rule for any reason.
Well, see, this is why the guy needed to DM you, because you're clearly not following. And when someone brings it up, you're like, no, being polite is bad.
I've been... Whatever, we're starting the show now. Welcome to Norse Code, where we're full of just salty hatred toward Arif. So we have a Cardinals game to talk about. We'll be doing that in just a few minutes. Also have a weird Kyle Rudolph YAC situation to talk about. Not the animal, yards after catch. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. But before we do, just wanted to thank you guys so much for listening and for helping out with Norse Code. Again, we really do appreciate it. If you enjoy the show, if you hear value in what we do here, you can go to patreon.com/Norse Code, or you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code and send in a donation that way. Again, it just helps keep the lights on, helps keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, and really helps keep this show afloat and going. And as a result of the donations that we've received, we will be going to New York next week. Next Thursday, we will be
doing a live show there.
Yeah, we'll be going to Bar None in Manhattan Thursday, October 18th at 9 p.m. We will be recording a live show. I will be posting the show later that evening, assuming that my luggage makes it to New York okay. So that will be on Thursday, October 18th. Again, 1 week from tonight that we are recording. So again, that's going to be awesome. We are also going to be at the Jets game itself. So looking forward to that. Okay, we've got all of this aside. What is going on with the Kyle Rudolph YAC tweet exactly?
So someone tweeted at Sam Newton, who's the Vikings football communications manager. He works in the PR department. Someone tweeted at him. I think there was a thread. He tweeted some interesting Viking stat about Kyle Rudolph. Someone tweeted in response, I'm very concerned about his lack of YAC, so yards after catch, because he has very heavy feet and he hates contact and he takes too long to turn up the field, which honestly, kind of fair, I think, as a criticism. And he responds with, there's no need to be concerned. Nearly half of Rudolph's yards this season have come after the catch. His average, his total yards after the catch this season is 8th among NFL tight ends, and his 4.9 yards after the catch is higher than the 3.7 put up so far by Zach Ertz, who everyone kind of regards as a very good tight end. But couple of weird caveats. And then Kyle Rudolph quote tweets it and say haters will say it's fake, which great response, great Twitter game from Kyle Rudolph, whose Twitter game we have responded to in the past. But they ended up asking him on Thursday about this slow news day, right? They asked him about this tweet. And Kyle Rudolph said it's been kind of the perception here for a while, but the numbers are what they are. This famously is the same person who keeps on deriding the media for judging players by the numbers. So, when it suits players, they tend to cite the numbers. When it doesn't, they say the numbers are bad. But fine. He says, I'm not the fastest guy in the world. I'm not the most elusive guy in the world. But when I get the ball in my hand, if it's third down, I'm trying to do everything I can to get to the sticks. Yeah, I have no problem talking about his effort positively. He's a very impactful player. His effort's a big part of it. Fine. The thing is, Sam Newton is a great employee, but that's like what he is, right? He's an employee of the Vikings. And so he ends up tweeting, I think, in a potentially intentionally misleading way. Which is that, and in fact, the Pioneer Press picked up the wrong thing from it, which is kind of maybe how some people might think it's misleading. So Kyle Rudolph is 8th in total yards after the catch, but that's kind of volume driven. His 4.9 yards after the catch is below average for a tight end. It is not 8th among tight ends. That's a misattribution. It is ahead of Zach Ertz, but he's having a bad year, so it's very strategic to use him. And you can always find, a player kind of having a down year statistically in some way and say, yeah, don't worry about this player. He's doing better than this highly regarded player. Like 3 years ago, you could say, don't worry about, whoever, right? Some defensive tackle. Geno Atkins hasn't put up, that many pressures this year. That's not like fair. So I looked, I was like, 4.9 is like, that seems low to me. What's going on? And it turns out it is. I looked at, let's see, I pulled up an Excel spreadsheet because I was just like, this is too weird. I can't let this go. So I looked at all the tight ends who could qualify with a certain number of receptions. And his 4.9 yards after the catch among tight ends with at least 10 receptions. So that's kind of how early we are into the season because you have to limit it to like 10 receptions, which is a small sample for receptions. And that's kind of what you're sacrificing to get a large sample of tight ends. And by large, I mean there's only 31 that qualify as having at least 10 receptions. Thin year for tight ends. Fantasy players know this. Anyways, 4.9 ranks 16th among 31 tight ends in yards after the catch, which that's average. That seems fine. But the thing is, he has a really low yards before catch. And so his yards after the catch should be higher because if you target tight ends or any player underneath, the reason you target them underneath is because there's a higher likelihood of them to be able to generate yards after the catch. And they tend to be, especially tight ends and running backs, they tend to be in these no cover zones that when you're in zone defense, you don't cover the first, 3 to 4 yards, for, fairly obvious reasons. There's only so much field you can cover, and it makes sense not to cover the first couple of yards. So that gives you an advantage in this particular statistic in yards after the catch. So if you're getting like 9 yards before catch, which is kind of like what OJ Howard is doing, or Travis Kelce is doing, 8.6 yards before catch, then your yards after the catch might be a little bit lower. And on an individual catch basis, it actually kind of it's a parabola. So there's actually, after like 20 yards, it's very easy to get yards after the catch, but like before then it's hard, and then it gets easier again close to the line of scrimmage. But against averages, you see higher yards after the catch, the lower yards before catch you see. And the differences between those two things are kind of where yards after the catch talent should be. So I ran a thing to see, well, how many would you expect? How many yards after the catch would you expect given Kyle Rudolph's kind of depth of target here? And he's below average. He should be getting 5.6, and instead he's getting 4.9. And so he's getting lower or targets kind of closer to the line of scrimmage, and he's not, kind of making up for it with his yards after the catch. I'm not saying that he's a bad receiving tight end just because of like this particular statistic or anything like that. I'm just saying like it's like easy to get tricked by this stuff, and then it's like weird to see players like be proud of a statistic that they're not actually performing very well in. Like one of the reasons Kyle Rudolph is like 8th in yards after the catch among tight ends is because he's among the league leaders in receptions among tight ends. Now, if you're a league leader in reception among tight ends, that means you're probably a good receiving tight end. So I'm not saying he's a bad receiving tight end. I'm just saying like this is not where he shines. And so to say, actually, he's very good at this thing. It's not accurate. That's the only thing in Vikings news that happened in the past 2 days, right? So we're done.
Pretty much. I mean, would you classify him as an athletic tight end then? Not to beat a dead horse here.
Right. Yeah. I never said he wasn't until just now when I said no. In that tweet, all I was saying is that it's kind of funny that the Vikings keep on drafting athletic tight ends. They're not. And like the least athletic tight ends they've drafted are the ones that have worked out, right? Like Tyler Conklin, who's not, sub-athletic or anything like that, is on the roster. David Morgan is like not the super athlete, and he might be the best tight end on the roster. Kyle Rudolph's been on the roster for years. He's got a contract extension. So, obviously that's not everything.
I did want to bring this up because we had talked a little bit about this earlier. The Star Tribune's reporting has been a little questionable lately, I think. Didn't the Star Tribune label Linval Joseph as a track star?
That's Viking Update.
Oh, that's Viking Update that listed him as a track star. No.
Yeah, this is super funny, too. So everyone's like, Linval, you're fast. Wow. And he's like, I was never slow, which, that's true. He's like always going to be faster than like I am. Right.
Probably wouldn't fall. Well, he doesn't fall over in coverage.
We don't know that. We just saw the one coverage snap from him. I didn't fall over in every one of my coverage snaps. I just fell over a very high percentage at the time relative to what you'd expect like a human to do, which is zero times.
So many broken ankles.
So, I mean, if we give Linval Joseph 20 snaps in coverage and he doesn't fall over once, I'll concede it. But
let's not, because that would mean we lose the game.
Well, I mean, probably don't do it all in the same game. But they all asked him like, hey, Linval Joseph, like, you ran like 18.6 miles per hour, which, side note, that's insanely impressive. Let's talk about it. And he was talking about his, high school career in track and field, where he's mainly a shot put and discus guy. He mentions, right, that he occasionally ran the 200 and the 400 and that he never placed like last, right? But like calling him a high school sprinter, I think like, which is what the headline and tweet do. Kind of mischaracterizes everything.
Because they don't have, it's not like they have weight classes in track. They don't. So like every offensive lineman that you ever saw in high school was, a big, thick guy. Like no way that you are outpacing any, like, okay, except for the one guy that's like behind him. But like there's no way that you're outpacing every single person in that race. Right. You are not a track star in that sense of the word.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And if you're like, well, I went to high school with like Teron Armstead or Lane Johnson, or like, okay, fine, maybe they were like sprinters in high school. So I might believe that. But I mean, so the thing, so Linval Joseph won the 100-meter fat man relay. So this is when they do impose a weight class, which is the shot put and discus guys end up, running. And he won, which like that's not surprising. I mean, we know he's an incredible athlete. So
these races happen. Hell, I remember them happening in high school when I was in shot put and discus. They're in discus too. So no, I'm just envisioning all of the like fat guys there, like, quote unquote fat guys, and then just him burning by everyone, just like maybe even lapping.
That must have been a sight.
That would have been impressive. Now I have this vision in my head of Phil Lodeholt running a fat guy race and like being an entire body above some of these people.
Yeah, right.
Phil Lodeholt, just under 7 feet tall, just burning,
barreling through. Yeah.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I guess the only other bits of Vikings news are one that Mike Zimmer says it's fake, that the Vikings expect Everson Griffin not to return this season. That's an ESPN report that Everson Griffin's not going to return this season. Mike Zimmer says that that's not true. And Dalvin Cook, we should just lead with this because this is the most important one. Dalvin Cook, full participant in practice.
Yeah, ignore all the other news, the quote-unquote news we've been talking about. The real thing is that Dalvin Cook looks decent, or at least feels decent, and is ready to return to practice.
Right, yeah. My cousin asked me on Facebook, so he does this all the time. He's like, Arif, tell me about fantasy football, which, like, that's, I'm not great at it. As, like, members of one of the two Norse Code leagues can attest to. The other one I'm winning in, so,
Yeah.
Don't tell them.
Hey, no. We all of the Norse Code staff won last year, so.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It was a great.
Norse Code won the league last year. That's true.
It was a great victory for all of us.
Yeah, but he's like, so should I trust Dalvin Cook because I've got Chris Thompson? I'm like, why are you asking me? Obviously, you play Chris Thompson, right? Like, it's not like Dalvin Cook gets like an insane workload if it was like last year's offense, and this year it's just like. I would like wait until the Vikings prove that they like want to use him a lot before I would rather be late than try to be early on this one.
And as promised, we have a special guest to talk about the Arizona Cardinals. He's actually been on the show before. He is Blake Allen Murphy. He is staff writer for Revenge of the Birds. He is also the co-host of the Bird Gang Blitz podcast. Friend of the show, Blake Allen Murphy. How you doing, Blake?
Doing great. I hope you guys are having a pretty good evening tonight. We're recording here on a Thursday night.
We are recording on the Thursday night. Eli is being Eli, and the best thing we can do is just ignore the game, ignore the Eli, and just move on and talk about the Arizona Vikings game going on this weekend. And I guess my question is related to former Vikings quarterback Sam Bradford. The Cardinals proceeded to back a Brinks truck up to his home and offered him, I believe it was like $20 million. Was it $20 million guaranteed?
Yeah, it was like $15 million guaranteed, and then they put in a clause where it's like $300,000 for every game he's active. So they've currently been saying, let's save a little bit of money.
That's why he's the third quarterback.
That's why they demoted him, because it's like, you know what, we don't have to pay you unless we don't want to. Maybe there's other options that they could have done, but that's why they did it for now.
So somewhere between,
so he's not.
Yeah.
They don't actually think like if Rosen goes down because of injury, they're probably just going to go back to him because they'd have to pay him either way because he'd be the second quarterback.
Yeah, well, the alternative then is Mike Glennon.
Right,
and,
yeah.
That's not really an alternative.
Chicago Bears legend Mike Glennon. Yeah,
you might as well run the Wildcat in that sense if you're going to have to go with Mike Glennon at quarterback.
Well, at least you know what you're getting there. So I guess my question is more related to the amount of money that they decided to give Bradford this year, anywhere between kind of 15 and 17 million here. What should the Cardinals have done with that money that would have been more useful, other than like lighting it on fire like the Joker, or like building a nice park in the Arizona air, like in the state of Arizona? Like what should they have done that would have been more productive?
Well, I mean, outside of building a statue to Larry Fitzgerald simply for the level of quarterback play he's had to have with his entire year, his entire career. I mean, you're talking about it's the guys like Max Hall, this Ryan Lindley, all these guys he's caught touchdown passes from. And you're talking then about Sam Bradford potentially being like maybe the worst of those that he's had in a lot of different ways with his on-field play. So, but if I had to pick an option, I'd have kept Sam Bradford in mind, but maybe done the Sam Bradford Memorial Hospital for those who have multiple tears, multiple ACLs. For those who have no knees, that probably would have been a little bit better. That $15 million could go a long way towards a building, considering Arizona's a pretty cheap real estate market.
Yep, for those with no knees, a step up.
Oh, goodness, at least. Yeah, well, and then not expected in the pocket. No, it's going to be definitely drifting back and taking the check down. That's really what you saw from Arizona's offense the first few games.
Well, okay, so this is definitely worth asking about. Okay, so like the Vikings were supposed to have like this like kind of mini revenge tour, right? Because they're going to play Sam Bradford, and then the next week they're going to play Teddy Bridgewater. Turns out neither of those things are going to happen. Which, I mean, it's not like a sure thing that Bridgewater would have played, but still, it would have been fun. But like, what happened to Bradford? Because in 2016, he was pretty good, and then like I'm not counting the Chicago game, the one game that he was actually healthy for in 2017, he was like explosive against what turned out to be like a top 5 defense. So like, what the hell?
Yeah, well, I think one thing we can think of, at least for in that first game, was when you take a look at what the Saints defense have done in their first game of the year for the last couple of years. Maybe if Sam Bradford could have played the Saints defense in the first game of the year for everything, he probably would have made another $150 million plus or so dollars, I guess. But really, I think what's happened is a lot of it is just the age, and I think the injuries have taken their toll. Where when I looked at him in camp, his arm just did not look the same. The biggest thing I noticed when he was going deep was that every time he went deep, it was like that the ball just floated in the air. I know one time I was like, oh, there's a deep shot. Oh, that's into double coverage. Patrick Peterson picked it off as like the easiest interception you've seen. And it was like, this is the guy who was going to be your starting quarterback, but he did at least get the offense down. He looked like he had a lot of at least the mobility back, but a lot of it would just seem to be the way that he was playing was, best way you can describe it at least, is skittish. He didn't seem to have the same type of fearlessness that he had in 2016 to take a hit. He looked like he was going through his first read, wouldn't even let some of the other routes clear later in the game, and he would just kind of take the check down repeatedly. And that's where you saw a lot of 3-and-outs that the Cardinals offense had early. So it just seemed like it was kind of a combination when you put him in that conservative Mike McCoy offense, at least, then it just did not really end up working out, I think, in the Cardinals' favor, where they're trying to adjust, trying to make a dink and dunk, but there was just so many plays that were being left on the field because he was just hurry up and try to get it off there to avoid getting hit. And I think that's really what's it's come down to, is just after the rest of the injuries being out for 2017, coming in and not having the greatest protection in Arizona. I think that's that skittishness that he has that really has kind of been the reason why they felt that they had to move to Josh Rosen. In addition to the fact that he kept turning the ball over, it was part of what allowed Chicago to get back into that game that led to his benching for Rosen.
All right. Okay. So that it is still bizarre, especially hearing that like his arm had kind of died because he had a really strong arm. Not that he necessarily ever used it inside or outside of Arizona.
And it's the accuracy too. Like the accuracy just was not there this year. So whether it's due to his leg not being able to plant or just kind of having to pull the trigger quickly, it just became pretty apparent in Arizona that it was not the same Sam Bradford that has been in the NFL for the last few years. The Cardinals put in those contract stipulations expecting that he would get hurt. They never dreamed that it was going to be due to bad play that he'd get benched.
Right. Okay, so that's kind of fascinating. That kind of leads to sort of the next question then, which is it's Josh Rosen. I feel like personally, I think that he's looked really good. I think he's looked better than anyone but Baker out of the rookie quarterbacks. But he doesn't necessarily have kind of the tools around him, or maybe the play calling to take advantage of that. Am I being too positive? Am I not being positive enough? What do you think about Rosen's play?
Yeah, no, well, when you look against the Seahawks game, he should have probably had about 3 touchdowns and 300 yards that his receivers left on the field. And he's basically, last week, it's been, despite having not really the most accurate day against the Niners, he's really ultimately been kind of protecting and helping the Cardinals offense in a lot of different ways, despite a lot of the, poor receiving and a lot of the predictable play calling. He's only taken 2 sacks in 2 games that he's started, at least after the Bears game. And really, he's been under pressure for like almost half of his snaps, at least for the most part. So he's not had good offensive line play. He's been able to manipulate the pocket and really has taken a lot of, deep and also aggressive shots too. He's not really throwing to open guys, but he's throwing guys open in a lot of different ways. That's really a positive that you want to see, a trait in the top level quarterbacks, but it's not been easy. He's still been a rookie, obviously, still having to kind of learn a lot of things on the fly. Ultimately, that's part of how it is. But really, when you're looking at a player who's making a lot of the smart decisions, like you've had, plays that will look like they were going to turn into a big sack. He managed to get the ball to David Johnson, runs back to the line of scrimmage. He just has met a lot of where you can see kind of that mind that he has coming out. And that's part of where, whether it's about the confidence or just the kind of playing with no fear, you almost feel like the Rosen or Baker kind of like a bowler, just that type of a rivalry sparking up with these kind of, I guess you can call it like millennial madness or something. It feels like it'd be really exciting to see.
All right. So where do you think that Rosen probably might be most exploited by the Vikings? And I don't mean like, the offensive line is weak, so we'll see a lot of pressure, but more like if we do see a lot of pressure, is Rosen struggling more under pressure than you would expect a quarterback to be? So like when we kind of extricate the problems caused by his supporting cast, where do you think the Vikings can take kind of the most advantage of him? Does he take too many chances? Does he have issues under pressure? Is he just too willing to give up on a play and throw short? What are his weaknesses?
Yeah, the biggest weakness, I think, is that he sometimes will kind of play a little bit of hero ball, whether that's trusting sometimes the athleticism, or most notably, at least you look back to the Bears game on 4th and 5, he was under pressure, couldn't step into the throw, threw the ball anyway. It was a little bit behind the receiver, but it got intercepted. I think it's going to be that type of, since he's shown willingness to throw into tight windows, I think that if you can try to take advantage of that, maybe end up seeing if you can try to bait or disguise a couple of coverages as a rookie. He's still learning a lot. I know previously mentioned in camp that there was a look even in practice he had where the team was showing an all-out blitz and all of a sudden they dropped 8 and he's like, how'd they do that? That's interesting. So even though he's got a smart mind and has been learning quickly, this is still a guy making his 3rd start overall in the NFL. And I think that being able to try to mix up some things, recognize, he played the Legion of Whom, I should say, at least his first week as a starter. Last week, the Niners, they instantly saw, oh yeah, the safety is going to bite really hard in this play action. And they were able to throw a 75-yard touchdown to Christian Kirk to start the game, and it was kind of hard for the Niners to come back after that. So I think that against a tough defense with the multiple blitzes or disguises, just take advantage of the fact that there's some things that he hasn't seen before and see if you can kind of force a turnover. So he has not turned the ball over in his first 2 starts, which is part of the reason why the Cardinals were in the Seahawks game until the end, and part of the reason why they won the Niners game. But if you can kind of force a turnover or 2, that would be the best way to attack the rookie QB.
You mentioned play action. The Cardinals are like the 2nd least likely team, at least based off of these last 5 weeks. Maybe it's different with Bradford and Rosen split, but they don't run play action very often. Only one team runs it less often, which is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Why aren't they running play action more? It seems like they generate 3.7 more yards per attempt on play action. They've got like a 65 passer rating without it, 120 passer rating with it. Why don't we see it more often? Do you think it's because the coaches believe that play action is like very contingent upon developing a running game and the running game isn't going, or what do you think the reason is?
Yeah, I think that totally is. I think a lot of the Cardinals fans, when you talk to them, they feel like Mike McCoy is a dinosaur. And you know what? I'll give Mike McCoy credit. He's probably the first person I know of who can kind of convince the entire state of Arizona that there's a white man who can be too conservative. He really has just not been able to have any type of offense that's been able to be creative or use even the talent that they have. The play action, like you're saying, it's super effective. Rosen's been able to go off of it and just deliver so well. But because they haven't been able to run the football, a lot of times you'll see like a 1st and 10, okay, power run up the middle, David Johnson, 2 yards. 2nd down and 10, power run up the middle for 2 yards. All right, well, we can't really run the ball, at least on 3rd down, so they know play action's coming. So we're just going to have to, line up in 11 personnel, run our pass pattern, hope for the best, and hope we don't get a 3 and out. And it's just been that type of repeated kind of like banging your head into the wall again and again, just waiting for it to work. And I think there's a lot of reasons behind it. McCoy was called out, I think, for being too complex with the Broncos, where they said that he was just players were lost and not sure what their assignments were. And David Johnson's had a lot of, they called mental errors so far. I think that McCoy designing an offense that, while it's simple, is just maybe too complex in the assignments and terminology, is kind of fed into this kind of cycle then of, David Johnson's not running the right route on this play, or not picking up the blitzer and pass protection, despite the fact that David Johnson should be out there running a route and not in on pass protection. And I think that that's kind of caused the coaching staff to have a lack of trust in them being able to run some of these plays. But it's really been kind of coming down to, with the Cardinals, of a lot of the teams should be doing better and should be doing more. And a lot of these kind of common sense things just aren't really happening, at least with a stubborn OC. And it's part of the reason he got run out of Denver last year. And it's part of why a lot of people are just questioning his job and stability now. You're just not seeing guys really used in their right skill sets, despite the fact that, even coaches and the general manager called out and said, hey, we'd like to see David Johnson used more, in the passing plays. I see him lined out more. It's like, oh, okay. What did Mike McCoy do? 3 passing attempts, all out of the backfield for 2 catches for 36 yards. None of them came from in the slot or lined up wide. It's like, okay, if your head coach and your GM is telling you to do something and you're still not doing it, that's really not a good sign overall, at least as far as for your continuing with the franchise. So we'll see how that goes, but he's still going to be the OC on Sunday. We'll have to see. Maybe there will be some changes that they'll do. Maybe there will be some adaptation, but at this point, Cardinals fans are really not optimistic that he's going to be able to do that type of adaptation that he was perceived to be known for, and in reality has just kind of done the opposite in Arizona.
So this David Johnson question is like really curious to me. So obviously we know that he's great at running the ball, generally speaking, but he was recruited, to Northern Iowa as a receiver. He played receiver for them for a while. He's like 6'1". Like a lot of times we think of like these really good receiving backs. We think of like Darren Sproles or Danny Woodhead, these smaller receivers that win through agility and space. And Johnson certainly has agility, but he also has speed and he has size as a receiver. And he can run routes about as well as a receiver. Plus he knows the receiver route tree pretty well. That seems like an insane advantage to have and not exploit it. Like, I mean, his rookie year, he got like 6 receiving touchdowns? Like that's, or maybe 8, I don't know, but like that's nuts, right? Like why? I mean, you already said we don't know why, but also why?
Yeah, and that's where I think it just comes down to with Mike McCoy. He's in a spot where, again, like with feeding and whether it's not a lack of trust, but I think really what it comes down to is he's just an old school coach who believes that the best way we can win is just by running power football. He's like, oh, we got a speedy back in David Johnson. They're not able to really recognize that he makes his plays even in space. You look at some of the touchdowns where he just has the speed to bend around the corner. You look at how he's used. What's really crazy is that the Cardinals have the capability to be doing a whole lot more with their offense than they actually are. And I'm not sure if McCoy's limiting it somewhat because of Rosen, but even just the run game, the calls, there was plays that I saw that they had in training camp that gave me some optimism where you saw the rookie Chase Edmonds in the backfield as a running back and David Johnson as a fullback who then ran out and ran a pass pattern. You're like, oh, wow, that's actually really creative. And they've never run that play during the actual regular season. You almost feel like, if Sam Bradford is stealing, money at least from the Cardinals, then Mike McCoy is, the Ocean's 11 assistant kind of on the other end for the most part. So I'm just, it's stunning and baffling at a point where, Bruce Arians comes on to, I think, the TD Fantasy podcast, like, yeah, they're not using David right. You got to throw him the ball more. And it's like, it's apparent and clear for everyone to see it. And I think it just comes down to that you got McCoy is really stuck and stubborn in what he wants to do. And that ultimately is just not a good sign of coaching where you can just say, yeah, it's on the players to execute. They're not executing. In this NFL, you have to recognize and see the change to these type of spread offenses of getting the field moved out, of being able to use these athletes in space. And it just is kind of more of like looking at a 1990s offense that suddenly entered the year 3000 when you're looking and seeing McCoy go up last week against a guy like Kyle Shanahan and like he'll be doing this week against John DeFilippo.
So let's switch the conversation from the play calling and the quarterback to everyone else. There are maybe 2 offensive lines in the NFL that are definitively, like clearly, unambiguously worse than the Vikings. One of them is the Houston Texans, rip Deshaun Watson. The other one's the Arizona Cardinals, which it seems like if you were going to roll into the season with Sam Bradford as your quarterback, like your next investment should be in like 4 offensive linemen or something like that. But we've got I think the starters are DJ Humphries, Mike Iupati, Mason Cole, Justin Pugh, and Andre Smith. So they definitely got some free agents, right? Like I think Andre Smith and Justin Pugh are new additions.
Yeah, technically they got free agents if you want to count Andre Smith as an addition. So
right, yeah, I mean like technically, right? But like what the hell? Like why? Yeah, I guess I just have this additional question. Why? What the hell? They're 32nd in PFF grade. I think they're 31st in pass blocking efficiency. I want to say they're 30th in run blocking grade. They're bad. How did it get here?
Yeah, I think part of it was that they had an idea that they had built around this mentality of running the football. And that was part of why instead of keeping Jared Valdir at his contract, they traded him to the Broncos to free up a bit of cap space. They were really ultimately limited in a lot of ways with trying to go for it with the playoffs with a veteran quarterback in Carson Palmer with his contract. They still have Larry Fitzgerald, obviously, at least they're paying quite a bit of money to. So they kind of had the room for one kind of bigger acquisition that was Justin Pugh, who's just not been good overall with the pass protection, and they haven't been able to run the ball. I do think a lot of that does ultimately fall on Mike McCoy. If you look at his statistics, I think it was Seth Cox, I know, who's kind of the site manager at Revenge of the Birds, just looking over in the preseason and just notice, hey, like Mike McCoy has only had one season that he's ever had a rushing attack that's ever been in the top 16, and that was the Tebow year. Every year after that, it's been lower. And so what you did was you had a defensive and conservative-minded kind of head coach in Steve Wilks, who hired a offensive coordinator who doesn't really do a good job at running the ball and telling them, hey, we're going to run the ball. They brought back Mike Iupati and lost their starting veteran center for the year. Overall, that's kind of where you brought in a rookie to replace him. The tackles have been okay. Andre Smith has, been in and out of the lineup with injury. John Wetzel's actually been solid. The tackles have been okay. It's just that the interior of the offensive line has been so bad in pass protection and that I'm not able to run the ball that you're getting in these kind of third and long situations where they're not really in favorable spots. You're getting pressure on the quarterback, and it just kind of ends up being a bit of a mess. Now, they will, I think, long-term be able to have some help with fixing that because, they'll have a lot of money with that rookie quarterback contract. But it's also been one of the concerns people have had about this general manager who drafted kind of Jonathan Cooper has been a bust and drafted about 4 or 5 offensive linemen, and DJ Humphries is really the only one who's left, him and Mason Cole. All the other guys have been released and just haven't been good. So maybe it's a talent evaluation or scouting problem, but I think that the team has tried to put some stuff in the line, but it was always going to be a bit of a transition year until they could get more of that cap room in 2019. It just has turned out far for the worse, since if you're bringing in these bad pass blockers to run block, you're not even running the football while you're 32nd in yards per game.
Would it have been better to? Wow, they're below the Vikings and Russia. They
passed them up this week. I know I was like, yeah, they were 31st at least entering the Niners game, and then after this week, they just jumped back down again to 32nd. So that just tells you just how bad it is, because we don't have any excuse like David Johnson's hurt or injured. We've got him in the backfield healthy.
Wow, this is. It's going to be a great shootout, I guess. Okay, so would it have been better to find a way, and I don't know what the guaranteed situation looks like, so tell me if I'm wrong, but find a way to shed Larry Fitzgerald's contract and invest that into the offensive line? And I know there's not a ton of receiving help in Arizona either, so maybe not, but it seems like the problem spread from the line outwards. And a receiving problem you can find a way past, but an offensive line problem you can't. Would it have been better? I mean, because he's getting paid a lot of money.
Yeah, it's about $11 million or so, I think, for this year, and the production just has not been there. He's on pace for only about 500 or so yards, and I think a lot of it was in 2017. Now, John Brown at least has kind of had a resurgence since he left the Cardinals. I think some of that, from what he's talked about, is he believes the desert heat had a hard time with his healing. At least it's kind of sad to see. It's also a spot where I don't think the Cardinals would have brought him back even on a 1-year deal anyway, considering that Sam Bradford was kind of plan A going in, and Sam Bradford, as far as the deep ball like we talked about, they weren't really going to favor a lot of that. I think at this point, because of how bad the receiving core was, and again, he had 5 drops and another at least 3 or 4 against the Niners again. So because of how bad the receiving core was, I don't think it's a spot where you could say that you wanted to move on from Fitzgerald, and they wouldn't really have anyway. Michael Bidwell wants him to basically retire a Cardinal. He recognizes some of the importance. So I think that you wanted to have a veteran kind of mentor guy like that as well, just that Josh can come in for his first year. Someone can just tell him, hey man, I know that you are into hot tub and stuff like that, but we do it this way a little bit. So I think that's kind of some of the value that I think you would have. And really a lot of it is the first couple of weeks of the season. You kind of did see that Larry Fitzgerald. He had, I think, 4 catches for 77 yards in the first game. But since then, it's not just been him. It's been the entire offense, from the line, the receivers, the blocking, the assignments, the running backs. It's just been a rookie quarterback. It's just been a huge mess in Arizona. I think some of it is stemming from the offensive coordinator, and some of it is just this is a team that is going to be going through a rebuild. And I'd rather have a guy like Fitzgerald there, if at least Rosen can rely on him in a passing situation, than have to be throwing to a third rookie or throwing to a Michael Crabtree, who probably at this rate would drop it anyway.
Right. Okay, well, let's talk about sort of the other part of that equation. Let's talk about the tight ends. It feels like when you talk about the Cardinals in a tight end situation, it always feels like, God, they got to get a tight end. What's happening? And they never seem to have one. They always kind of workshop some in. I think Darren Fells was a Cardinal for a while and stuff like that. But Ricky Seals-Jones has really turned into kind of this underrated. No one talks about him, but it seems like he's actually doing really well at tight end.
Yeah, as far as a pass catcher goes, he's really not been that great at run blocking this year, but when they've been able to split him out, he's been able to separate as a big body. The Seattle game kind of showed you some of the peak of Ricky Seals-Jones, where you had to see 2 amazing, well-placed throws by Rosen that went for some pretty big catches, at least just using him as a wide receiver, and then you got to see a sack in the game that he kind of ended up blowing the containing coverage on. There was another late 3rd and 2 play that was the best way to kind of look at it was just a terrible, at least, play call where they decided to not have David Johnson on the field. And then Jermaine Gresham, who's been coming off of a pretty serious Achilles injury. There's a leakage out the back end. Guy gets taken down. Seattle takes over with like 2 minutes left, and Russell Wilson does what Russell Wilson does. And really just, even though they've got a guy like Ricky Seals-Jones, he just hasn't been as consistent with some of the game with the drops. But I do think that if the Cardinals are going to be able to look for any type of mismatch, and Mike McCoy doesn't seem to be big on mismatches for whatever reason, I guess. Sure. But if they do, just being able to try to find times that he could line up on a guy like Anthony Barr with the receiving skills that he has, that would be a great option, I think, for Rosen to try to take advantage of in the game. So I think that he might have a decent game against the Vikings this week if they can try to find a way to, exploit some of those type of matchups.
All right. And I noticed that so moving off of tight ends, I noticed that Kendall Wright's on the roster. Is he seeing any snaps or no?
He was just signed this week. I honestly don't think he's going to play in this game. That would be my guess.
It's like a scouting report thing. Okay.
It very possibly could be, but they entered the offseason. A lot of this does kind of fall on the GM, where the veteran offseason receivers that they brought in to kind of say, all right, we know we've got a young wide receiver here. We just drafted a rookie in Christian Kirk. Mm-hmm. The veteran wide receivers they picked were Bryce Butler, and they found Greg Little hanging out in who knows where, brought him into camp, and then eventually cut them both. So you're like, okay, well, you really didn't address the issue that you had there overall. And so that's part of the reason why I think they're going after Kendall right now, is just to get another veteran who's in the room, who's actually has a history of catching the ball in the NFL before. The Cardinals are so young overall outside of Fitzgerald, and between whether it's the injury or the usage, they're just not getting enough. And now they've got about 40 slot guys on the team. So we'll have to see however those will get, that's not even including, if they were to line up David Johnson in the slot.
Right. Well, how has Christian Kirk been? Because I remember Chad Williams from the Senior Bowl. He's kind of like a favorite of mine from the Senior Bowl. Didn't do a ton last year. I think he flashed a little bit. But it seems like Christian Kirk is like what people are talking about in regards to, the Arizona receiving situation. How's he been?
Well, yeah, he's had a couple of drops. Some of them have been mystifying at least, but overall he's right now second in receiving yards amongst rookie wide receivers. He's really taken to his role overall. He'll probably even actually end up turning into a little bit more of maybe either a Golden Tate or that type of, slot threat that's going to be really big. It's interesting because with his type of breakaway speed, he's had solid routes, and just the fact that whenever he gets kind of his hands on the ball, he's done a great job as a punt returner. My ultimate kind of hope, at least as far as for his upside, is not that he'd become a Golden Tate, but more that he would kind of turn into a Stephon Diggs type of receiver, where you're talking about an every down kind of threat guy, where you can kind of have at least one slot guy who's moving around. Thielen, I know, is now more the slot guy for you this year, but there's that kind of hope of him being able to be a guy who on a team is maybe not going to be like a Julio Jones type of number one, but still a number one kind of big threat that you have to watch out for. And he's easily been kind of the Cardinals' leading receiver this year as far as yards are concerned. He and Rosen go back to their high school days. Actually, they thought about teaming up together at UCLA, and then they ended up kind of going some other separate ways, and now they're back again together. He's a fan favorite since he went and played high school football over here. Decided not to go to Arizona State, but all amends are kind of made now that he's catching passes and touchdowns for the Cardinals.
Fair enough. Let's talk about the other side of the ball then. So defensively, I feel like I expected more out of the Cardinals than we've seen this year. How do you characterize kind of this defense overall and what you've seen versus kind of the expectations you had coming in?
Yeah, it's pretty mystifying. The Cardinals are 31st, I think, against the run, which is shocking for the most part, considering this is a top 6 team, I believe, against the run last year with pretty much the same players overall. And so you're talking about just the adjustments with Steve Wilkes' scheme. You're seeing some missed tackles. You're seeing, some gap assignment issues for the most part. I don't know how much at least of the scheme is in, but I do think that by shifting away from a team where you got to see, the linebackers were the guys who were coming in kind of cleaning up from what the defensive line would do. Now the defensive line is expected to make plays, and the linebackers are in coverage, and they've had a linebacker problem where a lot of teams are able to take those checkdowns, or they're not as disciplined in knowing their gaps. It's not quite like having 3 Anthony Barrs, but they're At least this year. It's been more of that they had to play a not really even a 4-3. It's been a 4-2-5 defense, and they're having to bring Budda Baker in essentially as a linebacker a lot just because they do not have the ability in his scheme to cover, and they just have not done a good job of adapting to their talent. So I think some of it might be is that Wilkes is an aggressive kind of team with some aggressive play calls. So teams just took advantage of that. In the Niners game, they had to drive down the field completely with screens and struggle to defend the screens. I mean, they gave up about like 470 yards of offense to CJ Beathard and Alfred Morris, your backup quarterback and your third string running back. And so I think that's been the most disappointing thing for the Cardinals fans is it's like, you're not sure, is it the players you have to blame? Do you need to get new talent to fit the scheme? Is it not adapting to the scheme? They seem to really only do well overall, at least when they can force a lot of turnovers. And that's, I think, the only way that they'll be able to kind of win the game is if they can kind of pull out a Revenge of the Bills 2.0 and try to, sack Cousins, force a couple of defensive turnovers, get some short field. And then that's really about the way that their path is to victory this year, since they're not really able to get off the field on third down. And as we talked about their offense, they're not having a hard time staying on the field overall.
Yeah, so that's good because it kind of matches. I was playing around with some advanced stats a little bit before this podcast, and I noticed something really weird. So the Cardinals are about like 20th, 24th, somewhere around there in pressure rate, which is, below average, but, not like alarming. But they're second in percentage of passes below 2.5 seconds defensively, which means despite not getting a ton of pressure, people are throwing the ball quicker against them than all but one other team, the Cleveland Browns. So do you think that speaks, you think, to the underneath coverage? Maybe they're playing a lot of off coverage. You mentioned screen passes. There's a weakness there that people seem to be exploiting then, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's not that it's even a weakness amongst their safeties. Their safeties are leading the team in tackling right now, and that tells you that they're not really getting it done up front. It also tells you that they're really struggling to kind of get it done with the second line of defense, too, with the linebackers. They've finally kind of seemed to have settled on their two guys in Josh Bynes, who's been having a solid year, and then Hassan Reddick. They've kind of had to figure out what Reddick's role is, because this is a guy who was a defensive end in college that was recruited as a safety. Now he went from a 3-4 out inside linebacker to, you saw an injury to Marcus Golden, switched to a 3-4 outside linebacker, and then is learning a 4-3 linebacker, kind of playing like some of the will this year. And you're like, okay, that's like more like, that's like, the equivalent of like a quarterback getting a different offensive coordinator every single year, kind of like Sam Bradford had. You're just going to have a hard time sticking, and his skill set really does favor being able to tackle guys and play downhill and get in the backfield. After the Niners game, they seem to have kind of found a role for him overall. He's had some decent plays in coverage, but really it's been just those linebackers that teams have just taken advantage of. You see it even from the first week of the season. Alex Smith basically dinked and dunked to the running backs and tight ends down the field. I think they had one pass caught by a wide receiver. So that tells you that Arizona at least has a solid coverage unit overall in the secondary. And so that's why I'm curious how it's going to work out, because the Vikings' weaknesses and the Cardinals' strengths kind of line up a lot. The Cardinals, I think, are like the 13th team and with how they are with passing yards. They're like bottom of the barrel in terms of defending the run, but the Vikings are a highly equipped passing offense. And then down the middle, at least, you're talking about like a struggling rushing attack too. So it's going to be interesting to see who's going to kind of be the one who will bend, who will break. And it's going to come down, I think, to some of those adjustments, depending on what's going to happen with the underneath plays in the screen game. If Arizona is going to finally be able to get it figured out, or if you're going to be like, oh no, that was a, swing pass to Kyle Rudolph. No one's there. He's wide open running down, the green grass of the field there. Right. So it'll be interesting to see at least if these teams are going to be closer matched for that aspect, or if it's just going to end up coming down to the Cardinals continually kind of finding ways to lose like a lot of bad teams do.
Yeah, no, you mentioned that the secondary is kind of upholding their end of the deal, and it certainly seems like that. So the Cardinals have a pretty low pressure rate, but on plays that quarterbacks are pressured, the Cardinals are like 5th in throwaway percentage. Quarterbacks throw the ball away against them a lot, which kind of implies that receivers aren't open. In clean pockets, the Cardinals are doing a pretty good job. There's something like 20th. Or I guess 12th in adjusted yards per attempt clean pocket. Against just pressure, they're like 5th in adjusted yards per attempt. So when pressure arrives, on the occasions that it does arrive, they're not getting many sacks. They're kind of low in sack rate under pressure, but they are forcing a lot of throwaways. They are, making those throws that do complete, not arrive for a bunch of yards. In clean pockets, it's kind of taking a while for receivers to get open. So it sounds like even though there's kind of been this consistent question about who's the corner opposite Patrick Peterson, the secondary is kind of, mostly doing its job. How do you think that Patrick Peterson is? But we even had a mailbag question. Patrick Peterson has been kind of one of the more consistent cornerbacks over the past couple of years. We talk a lot about these shutdown corners. They only seem to exist for a year, but Peterson's been really consistent. How has he been playing this year, and how's the secondary overall been holding up?
Yeah, the secondary has been probably the strongest element of the team, at least, unless you're going to talk about, how in the Seattle game and maybe even a few parts outside of Chandler Jones basically playing and just kind of seeming to get back to his dominant self. The secondary has been the best part of the Cardinals this season outside of the one game against the Rams where the Rams offense did what they did, and they kind of ended up getting Jamar Taylor benched from his spot across from Patrick Peterson. They have a healthy Ben Wickery on the outside there, and since he's kind of stepped up, he had about 3 years at least or so more in Steve Wilkes' defense. And Wilkes is a defensive guy who goes back as a defensive backs coach. That's been kind of his background. And he's kind of put Patrick Peterson in the spot where not that he's following guys around the field, but kind of sticking to one of those different spots similar to the Josh Norman role. And he's having an outstanding season so far. Like I know he had an interception, at least in the Rams game. Cardinals obviously didn't get much out of it, at least in that game where they were basically blanked by the Rams, even though the Rams don't really have a great defense this year. The secondary has been solid. Buda Baker at least has been having a overall game. I think he's at least 25th against cornerbacks, and that's considering that he's playing for the most part a lot of times a linebacker type role. And Antoine Bethea at least is still kind of kept a lot of his deep speed. He doesn't seem to have maybe as much strength. There's, I think, a kind of viral video of George Kittle blocking him like out of the blind side, like back into Yuma or something like that from San Francisco. But it's just been overall, that's been kind of the biggest strength of the team. And that's where a lot of teams are saying, all right, well, if we can't really throw it deep, we're not going to worry about taking a deep shot since that's buttoned up when there's wide open underneath coverage that we're able to hit guys with. So it seems like what they've kind of done is offenses have really adapted to where Arizona's strengths are, and so they're not really testing that part of Arizona. And so that's going to be really interesting to see, at least if it's going to be more of that type of game or matchup, or if it's going to be, taking on the Cardinals where they're strongest overall, and that's where they've been most consistent is in the secondary.
So it sounds like you're feeling pretty confident about this matchup. I mean, because you already mentioned it, it's strength on strength. You've got Stephon Diggs, you've got Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen's set an NFL record through the first 5 games. Stephon Diggs, personally, I think he's a better receiver. Doesn't really matter. They're both really phenomenal receivers, it seems like. You feel confident, even like Bene Benukri doesn't strike like fear into the hearts of men. And he'll be probably
pronouncing that name probably would. But no, oh gosh, no. Here's the thing about I feel, and I've talked about a lot of Cardinals fans with them, is that the feeling at least you have is that as long as they have Mike McCoy there, and as long as you kind of have with Steve Wilkes until the defense can adjust, people just do not really have the ability or confidence in the Cardinals to pick them to win. Even though I do think that some of the areas I see the matchups, the biggest thing I think overall is that when you take a look at the play calling that DeFilippo did last week, and you look at how Kyle Shanahan was still able to put up some 447 yards or so, this is just a team where I do think that maybe some of the strengths match up. So I've said that I think it'll be a little maybe closer than a blowout, but most Cardinals fans I know are expecting the Cardinals just to kind of get basically like dinked and dunked or adjusted at least to death, as far as because they just don't really make great adjustments overall, especially out of the half. They really are just dependent fully on forcing turnovers. And if you look at the Cardinals game at the end of it, they kind of needed to have 2 turnovers at the end of the game to really seal that win, because they were just getting run all over by CJ Beathard and the backup running back again. So I think this is just looking at it. This is not a really great Cardinals team, and they're having to go on the road for the rookie quarterback in a much more difficult atmosphere than at Levi's Stadium. So it's when I say as far as for confidence, I'm confident that if everything kind of goes right for Arizona, if they're able to kind of pull off a good defensive game plan up from the start, and if they're able to kind of make some adjustments on offense, statistically with the numbers, you think like you would have some confidence. But as far as the coaching goes, it just feels like a lot of that just kind of goes out the door because you don't see as many of those different adjustments. And a lot of Cardinals fans I even talked to or even looked at and say, hey, Matt Breida was averaging like 8 yards a carry on his rushing before he got injured and was hurt. If he had stayed in for the game, you just got the feeling that Arizona would have fallen behind, not been able to get back into it. So for me and my take, at least, it's just looking at the Cardinals. This is a matchup where there's a chance that I think I'll leave over that maybe if things go right and could win. But overall, as far as a team, until you can really prove that you can do it at least on the field, you really are just saying that this might be kind of who the Cardinals are. They're just a team that's going to have a lot of yards run up on them because they aren't able to get off the field in third down or stop the run, and they're just not able to get anything going on offense. They played, I think, 49 offensive snaps. They're on pace for a really, really historical low in terms of offensive snaps. Jesus and Christ. They had 92 snaps on defense last week, which is like one of the third highest of like ever. You're talking about this is like how are you even getting to this part? You can't even like manufacture, and it's just like the entirety of the Cardinals is just like it's like a car that's just broken down and not working. You're like, okay, is it the engine? Okay, no, it's the engine, and there's water in the carburetor. Okay, and you're just looking at a whole entire kind of rebuild because the parts that you have just are not functioning and working together. So I really think that unless the Cardinals can come out and surprise in a lot of ways, and a lot of people, including myself, don't think that they will. I just have a feeling this is the game that the Cardinals, if everything goes well, I think you can kind of keep it close. But really, I had expected this as a potential to be a blowout unless the defense can start forcing turnovers. So as long as they can keep Kirk upright, which we'll have to see about with the offensive line, it'll just really ultimately depend on who's going to win that turnover battle.
Well, okay, so that leads to two more questions. One is about the defensive line. I'll get to that in a second. But the other one is basically just like a prop bet. Adam Thielen over under 100 yards.
Ooh, that's a good prop bet. I think for me, depending on what they'll do as far as if they line him up in the slot on some of the, if they can get him in a coverage on a linebacker or two, I would lean toward going over 100 yards just because I think that you might end up getting some of the aspect of, again, if you're going to be in the Vikings and you have the potential to run like some 80 plays or so because Arizona's just not going to be there on offense, I would definitely say that I would at least take that for taking a chance. The other thing, at least with him, is if he is working out of the slot, he'll probably be on Budda Baker. Budda Baker has not been quite where the level of coverage Tyrann Mathieu was back when he was healthy and still had 2 ACLs. They're probably going to put Peterson in his zone area, at least in coverage, where he'll be seeing Diggs more often than that. I would assume he's not following guys around anymore like he used to. But I would at least
used to be like the point of pride, right? He's actually better than the point of pride, and he's following receivers.
Yeah, exactly. What's fun is that he's actually played like the best season of his career so far, at least, even though he's not following receivers. So it's like, okay, now that he's kind of in that traditional role, maybe there was a point to all of that you're saying. But I would take the over at least for that one on just because I do think also the other thing about seeing DeFilippo is he's an offensive coordinator who's going to adjust and try to favor his best talent. Mike McCoy is kind of the guy who says, wow, that's dumb. Here, we're going to, hand the ball off on 3rd and 6 at least and run the football. Our kicker is going to make this kick. Oh, he missed it. We really should have put that on Josh Rosen's arm, shouldn't we have? So I think that he is going to put the game on those two players, and that's where you're going to end up seeing at least 100 yards or so from there. If the Cardinals end up seeing, they've played a couple bad offenses 2 weeks in a row as far as, the passing offenses have been received. If you see a repeat like the Rams game and it is turned into that game where they're able to kind of pass a lot across the middle, then maybe that's going to be one of these things for the Cardinals where it'll be another tough wake-up call on the road with that rookie QB.
All right. Okay. So the final thing is about this defensive line. What do you think about, because they're not getting a ton of pressure. You mentioned that Chandler Jones is kind of back on his game. But overall, it just seems like the defensive line isn't kind of doing what it should. And I remember the Cardinals defensive line from Calais Campbell, Darnell Dockett, really good stuff, especially when they kind of switched to a more aggressive scheme with those two. But now we're not seeing a ton. Do you think against a weak offensive line, they'll be able to kind of get back in their jam or what's happening?
Yeah, I think it depends on some of it, at least, is what they're being asked to do in this current defense. Like Corey Peters, by all accounts, the stat sheet won't describe or say anything, but he's basically doing a really good job of kind of holding his own. The Cardinals, I think there was a stat that they had last week as far as where when Corey Peters was on the field, the Niners were limited to, I think it was like 40 rushing yards. When he was off the field, it was like 140 or something rushing yards. So it's just that aspect of what they're asking the defensive line to do is a bit different. The most kind of up until this last week with Chandler Jones kind of had his breakout game, the most explosive player for the Cardinals had been Robert Nkemdiche, and it was kind of like, oh, this is nice to have him come out of nowhere, but you're finally seeing some of that penetration. But he's been battling a foot injury. I don't know if that's going to be something that's chronic or repeated for him, but you kind of also saw some of the pros and cons of where he would just kind of run upfield and be able to kind of get some of the penetration. And some offenses started kind of baiting him into that, where he would run up thinking he was about to get a tackle for loss, and then wham, out of the backside, he would just kind of get blocked out of the play completely. So he's a guy who, if he's healthy and playing on Sunday, he's probably their best interior rusher. And he's had a couple of really good splash plays, but he still is just kind of getting on the field, and there's some inconsistency and other stuff that you've seen from him there, especially even against the run game. So I think that the hardest thing for the Cardinals is that they really have not had a second pass rusher on the other side of defensive end since Marcus Golden has still been battling to come back from an ACL tear, didn't play last week. They had Benson Mayowa from the Cowboys, who's had maybe one or two or so plays, but they really are just not really having as much of a splash from the defense as you like. So I think that's something to take a look for, at least, if Corey Peters is on the field and they're running the ball versus if Corey Peters isn't on the field. It's going to be interesting to kind of watch how some of those matchups will play out. But I think Arizona's in need of at least one more kind of playmaker on the defensive line, although there's been even some questions and doubts about it, not just with Wilkes' defense and with McCoy. Some people are just wondering, is this going to be like a one-and-done Cardinals team? And I tend to lean no. I think that they might get it figured out, but it's a tough backstretch. And, maybe the team just looks at their entire kind of mistake they made with McCoy and some of the conservatism, sees the other offensive records that are being broken, says, you know what, maybe we need to kind of reconsider some of this. Right. So I think that'll be interesting to look at for year two of either way. No matter what they do, they're going to need at least another defensive lineman or two. The guys that they have right now are, for the most part, good, not really all that great, especially compared to what the Vikings would have on their interior.
All right. Let's talk real quickly about special teams. I think Football Outsiders has them like 24th in DVOA. Pro Football Focus has them like 18th, so it's not too bad. But they brought in some kickers whose names are very familiar to Vikings fans. Will the Cardinals feel compelled to sign Kai Forbath or Daniel Carlson? And how do you feel about the state of the special teams unit overall? Is Christian Kirk kind of the lone bright spot, or are there kind of other things to look forward to from them?
Oh, man, their special teams, they have the MVP of their season so far. Andy Lee's punting the football at an incredible pace this year, which has been awesome. Oh, yeah. So hyped for the punting. Oh, man, it's been great. He's gotten more work probably than he's gotten in years. So, no, it's been great. The Cardinals, honestly, for the last few years have been really plagued by terrible special teams play. A lot of blame was put on Amos Jones as their former special teams coordinator under Bruce Arians. He's the guy who had multiple special teams of miscues against the Carolina Panthers in that the game at multiple years. Actually, I think there's two Panthers playoff games that were special teams miscues. They were constantly ranked 30th, 31st. I think in the 2016 year, you saw their defense was ranked number 1. Their offense was ranked top 10. Special teams was 32. And so the fact that they've gone from 32nd to 24th has been a huge boost. And they even actually, I would even argue they might have won in some cases the Niners game last week because San Francisco missed a extra point early, which forced them to have to go for a 2-point conversion in the fourth quarter, and they're driving back. They missed that. All of a sudden, instead of it being a tie game, you're down by 2 points, and then the Cardinals are able to kind of put some pressure, didn't have to really go down and score since they still had the lead, and Niners end up turning the ball over, turns into a fumble for 6. And I think that the Cardinals special teams right now, the biggest issue they have is they decided to say, we're going to go ahead, and even though we're in a season where we think we can make the playoffs, or they wanted to see maybe sneak in as like a 9-17 or so, they decided to keep their 43-year-old kicker Phil Dawson, and he's just not been super consistent during his time in Arizona. Missed 2 kicks in the Seahawks game, hit all the extra points last week, but I think that's an area where if he ends up missing another kick or two, you're going to start to see them look elsewhere, because I think this coaching staff is under a lot of fire. I mean, you can't really have a historically bad offense and be 31st against the run on defense as a first-time coach or as an offensive coordinator and not feel some of that heat. So I think it's possible that if Dawson does miss a kick, then maybe that's where you kind of regret them not signing the Matt McCrane, the kicker who the Raiders now had brought in, at least, who they really liked. They liked him a lot, but they felt a little bit more comfortable with the veteran. And so as a result, in week 4 against Seattle, they had to watch Phil Dawson miss almost seemingly a chip shot field goal while Sebastian Janikowski hit his. And then just on the TV a few minutes later, Matt McCrane for the Raiders in his first job kicking for them kicks his own game-winning field goal from a further distance. You're like, all right, this is just the universe and the football gods are just kind of crapping on Arizona for this whole decision of keeping the stability in Phil Dawson. So maybe we'll see a signing if he misses a couple kicks this week. Again, the consistency has been kind of a question with him even going back to last year. But overall, their unit at least is improved enough where it's at least respectable. Whereas before with Arizona, you were like literally seeing it cost them games.
Okay.
Right around I was going to say right around the time that you're going around and praising your punter, like going out of your way to praise your punter, things have gone horribly wrong. The wheels have fallen off at that point.
Yeah, when you're talking about your punter as being kind of your MVP in a lot of different ways, it's like, yeah, you really just have to recognize where this team is. And this is just a bad football team that for the last couple of weeks seemed to be finding ways to lose games. Last week, they kind of found a way to be able to kind of keep it close and then pull it up with the win from the defense. But that was kind of what you expect, is that they'd win when they are playing not quite a preseason second team. That's all the injuries the Niners have had, but that's what you expect. They would go out and be able to win that when they have 5 turnovers, and even still, it's just been a struggle. So this is just a Cardinals team that is just not good. They have a lot of things to kind of look at themselves in the mirror. You're having questions about just the staff, the roles of players. I think it's going to be a difficult season for a lot of Cardinals fans. Your hope is that they would at least get some progress from moving to a different guy, at least from, unlike Mike McCoy, a lot of have suggested Byron Leftwich, who's the quarterback's coach, saying, hey, you worked under Bruce Arians. Can you do that throw the ball to David Johnson thing? All right, great, you're hired. So I just wonder if that's going to be maybe some of what you look for. And the rest of the season really is going to be around Josh Rosen's development and the Cardinals figuring out who the core is as they kind of learn how to win again. And maybe they starts with being able to kind of build on that first win, being able to see kind of where they match up well with Minnesota. And maybe it starts kind of having to look themselves in the mirror after this really tough 2-game stretch with they're having to go against the Vikings on the road, then come back to Arizona and get ready for a home game against the similarly struggling Denver Broncos.
I mean, there's no better team. The Bills can attest to this. There's no better team to right the ship against for at least a week than the Minnesota Vikings.
Hey, it's maybe it's just an allergy to rookie Josh quarterbacks. Maybe that's all it is.
That would be pretty spectacular, huh?
I think that's the new nobody can throw left thing.
Yeah. Vikings can't win against Josh. Well, let's get a score prediction out of you just to gauge your overall. I mean, it sounds like you're pretty down on them and want the Vikings to, or not want, but would take the Vikings even versus, was it a 10-point spread? But yeah, it sounds like you're not super confident.
Yeah, I think just because when you're looking at how the team is, the team struggled offensively against a bad Niners team, and the bad Niners team also went and put up 474 yards of offense. It's like you can say that like you're down or being overly critical, but really when you're realistically talking about it, when you've got teams ranking in the 32 and the 30s and a lot of their spots on offense and defenses, I think that this is a Vikings team that when you're playing them on the road, it's going to be a lot rougher. I've got a score prediction of about 28-13. I don't think it's going to be a huge as far as for blowout, but I do think that if the Vikings can come out there and get up a little bit early, similar to what the Niners did, and can avoid maybe the big play or the big turnover, I think that they got the chance at least to be able to, figure out a couple of things and get the Cardinals and kind of take advantage of that bad offense. And again, this is probably going to be the toughest defense that Josh Rosen has played so far in terms of the full game. Against the Bears, when we saw him go under, he basically almost threw a pick six that was called back, took, I think, 2 sacks, and had another interception at the end of the game. So if he can get harassed pretty much by the offensive line, I think it'll be a long day for him. But I still expect that they'll be able to get a couple of things at least ironed out as he gets more comfortable in the offense, because I'll tell you, that dude, at least he just comes out swinging, throwing. He's got confidence and just doesn't get down with whatever mistakes happen to him. So he's the future, and at least it's worth watching the season for him. I mean, if you're looking at this team with Sam Bradford and Mike Glennon and no rookie quarterback right now, then you'd kind of like I'd be like wanting to ask you guys to be pallbearers or something like that at the funeral next week.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. Why don't you go ahead and plug your stuff for our listeners?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm writing for Revenge of the Birds, doing fantasy coverage each year for whatever team the Cards play. So I'll have some fantasy stat predictions up Sunday morning, just kind of last minute for those of you who are still wondering whether you should kind of plug in, Diggs or David Johnson into your flex. Also, been doing the Bird Game Blitz podcast. We've been running through a lot of the team's kind of struggles, a lot of really great kind of fan-centered analysis. We kind of say like it's all Bird Gang, no bull on the podcast. So always make sure that you can kind of follow there. And I'm always happy to talk with fans of pretty much almost any team, except for the 3 or 4 Seahawks fans I seem to keep having to come back and block repeatedly. But, other than that, it's all good up in here in Arizona.
Yeah, Arif wouldn't know anything about that, arguing with people online. Doesn't believe in it. Angers up the blood.
Yeah, I was about to say, aren't you still banned from North Dakota, Arif? Like, you can't even enter the state or fly over?
Oh, no, they let me in Grand Forks, but the rest of North Dakota.
Yeah,
Not as much.
Grand Forks isn't really part of North Dakota. Like, it's here, but it's we built a wall years ago. It's fine. We made Minnesota pay for it. It was great.
I was about to say, at least you should see the fence that they're trying to put down over here in Arizona. That's a lot of the fun stuff there. I know. Well, it's interesting. At least it's fun. I mean, that's like my favorite part of what this whole situation has turned into is like, state of Arizona at least is having to go ahead and support a guy like Josh Rosen, and that tells you a lot about how for all that they're struggling with and have gone with the Cardinals. At least you have the optimism that they decided not to take him off of their board like teams like the Giants or the Broncos did, at least for that one. And I think that's at least a little bit of the decision making that you want to see from some of that is adjusting to the player, not everything that you've seen at least from the off the field issues. And so far the Cardinals, like Arif said, so far he looks like the second best of this really, really good rookie quarterback class right now, and we'll see if he can continue that play on Sunday. Oh yeah, I forgot I was going to say the other thing was that even though he didn't actually retire at halftime, Sam Bradford looked like he was about to at the end of that Bears game. I thought he was like,
it was so bad. I watched that.
Oh my gosh,
that was tragic.
I thought he was like. I thought that he was going to come out of the game and say, "Hi, I'm Sam Bradford. This is why I'm joining the Athletic," or something like that. Almost done.
Or just do what was the name of the Bill that retired at halftime?
That was
Vontae Davis.
Vontae Davis. Yeah, just do the Vontae Davis thing. Like, nah, I'm not coming back out, man. There's there's just no way. Thanks a lot for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, anytime.
Well, let's go to the mailbag here, and the first question that we have is from Matt Nelson, who asks, "Is murder allowed for anyone that suggests that we just pencil this one in as a win?"
Well, I mean, if murder was allowed, it wouldn't be called murder. But yeah, no, that's fair.
That totally seems fair. So, how exactly are we going to lose to the worst to the new worst team in the league?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would look like a Patrick Peterson pick six, probably a return touchdown of some sort, which will kind of revive the questions about special teams woes. Although I guess the Cardinals, they don't have like great special teams.
Blocked. I'm going with blocked extra point.
That's a good one. Yeah, because you can return that for 2 points. Yeah, perfect. Got it.
Done. Next question. Don from Ohio asks, what seems more unrealistic? James in first place for the North Code Fantasy Football League or the Vikings' lack of a running game? Worst to first exists because, like, that phrase exists because it's a thing. Like, I can go from worst to first here. I'm doing quite well.
Yeah, you're in one of the leagues, you're undefeated, right?
I have one loss, but I'm in first place.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So, first place, James.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say it is more unlikely that the Vikings find a way to revive the running game this year than James. I mean, because he's on track, right?
Yeah, I'm on the right track. We don't know exactly what's going on behind this line, but I'm doing fine.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, because I'm not betting high on Vikings running game right now. John Belk asks, situational football aside, I feel like the area where Arif's analysis of what the Vikings should do has most often and consistently disagreed with what the Vikings actually do is who to play where on the offensive line. Any ideas why this might be? Arif, why don't they take your analysis seriously? You work at the Athletic.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about it too. But it's not as if like, Zimmer's going to say, we considered your input seriously, but we just decided after a several hours long discussion over what you had to say, that, we're going to stick to it for, this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason. Like, he's not going to. I just want you to yell out, I work for the Athletic, in the same way that Will Ferrell yells out, I drive a Dodge Stratus. My guess is that they care a lot about giving up interior pressure quickly. They care a lot about making sure that Brian O'Neill isn't forced to play too early, and they like how a lot of these offensive linemen are mentally approaching some of these things. Like Tom Compton is assignment sound, for example, and that's very important, right? So I would guess that there's like some combination of that. I also wouldn't be surprised if there was like a chemistry related reason, or maybe some stubbornness too. I'm not entirely sure. And the other sort of like obvious answer could be that like they're right and I'm wrong. Like that there's like a really good chance of that, where like the people who get to see them practice every day have like a better understanding of what's happening on the team than not. But if that's not the case, then I would imagine chemistry, stubbornness, performance in like team meetings, and the mental preparation of things, those all probably play a role then too.
Maybe it's the Trubisky thing and that they're doing it in spite of you.
That could be it. I mean, that is the only reason that Trubisky throws to his left these days.
Exactly. Zach Beeman says, with 5 games down and the Vikings record at 2-2-1, how many wins will it take to take the division? What's realistic? 10-5-1?
So if you take a look at like projected records and stuff like that, which I did basically right before the podcast just to fire off a tweet about playoff odds, the number of projected wins it would take to win the division, which they're always – projected wins are inherently conservative by nature, because if you're trying to minimize error, projecting a narrow range of wins as opposed to a wide range of wins is the best way to do it, because teams are unpredictable. So if you project 8 wins and they win 10, you're about as wrong as if they win 6. But if you project 10 wins, like it's great to get those 10, but a good chunk of time you'll be off by 4 if they get 6. So they're inherently conservative, but they project the division winner basically to have 10. And sometimes less. It's weird. I was looking at Team Rankings. So Team Rankings is this website that like not a ton of people visit. I imagine gamblers might visit a lot, but they do a bunch of really great statistical work that you can't find at other websites. Like they rank teams by like, third and long percentage and stuff like that, that it's kind of difficult sometimes to find all on one page on another website. But they're a gambling website and you can pay for their picks and stuff like that. But some of their stuff is very front facing. You don't have to pay for it. One of the things, and I think they tend to rank highly in PickWatch's, pick tracker. This year they're ranked pretty highly, and last year they ended up being ranked pretty highly. And so they've got some hidden formula that's why people would pay for their service. But they've got some hidden formula that basically says that there might be 3 teams in the NFC that have around 10 wins or more. In fact, if the cutoff is at 9.0 wins, only 3 teams have it. But there's like one team at 8.7, so basically 9. But yeah, there's not a ton of teams in the NFC with at least 9 wins. And then there's a bunch of like 8-8 teams, and of course the Vikings at 8-7-1 in their projection would then make the playoffs because they're better than an 8-8 team, right? Because it's 8.5 wins. So it may not take as much as we initially thought. Like going into the season, we're like, the NFC North, right? The Packers are back. They got Rodgers back. So they're a different team than last year. The Vikings were the best team in the NFC North last year. So they're obviously going to be a contender. The Lions are always mentioned. Matt Stafford's a pretty good quarterback. Darius Slay's great, and if Trubisky takes the next step, there you go. So the NFC North could be the most difficult division. It might take a lot of wins to win it because obviously they only play 6 games against each other. So they're going to play, these 10 games against these other opponents that they've got a great chance of winning. So it's going to take more than 10 wins, and it might not. There could be a 7-9 team this year, given how these projections look, that make the playoffs, which would be the second time, right after that Seahawks team.
Yes. Next question is from Eric Thompson and also Luke Braun. It is basically the same question. What would the Vikings equivalent of the Jimmy Butler fiasco be? Name specific roles for each player. And Luke Braun said, what could Kirk Cousins do off the field to alienate the locker room and fan base Jimmy Butler style? I'm thinking like Twitter pictures of him in a Green Bay jersey would be a good start.
I think that would alienate the fans a lot. The players, maybe not so much. Like that'd be like weird. Like, what are you doing? But like, wouldn't like anger them. Like I always feel like fans get more upset about this than the players do, which makes sense. Fans have a longer history with the team and are more invested in the rivalries. But like fans, it seems like tend to get more invested in this. So I think that would like maybe alienate the locker room, and it certainly would alienate fans. I don't know. Like, I think because for this question to like make sense, we have to think of some like realistic scenario, something that like at least fits within like kind of the personality parameters we've set forth for what we understand of Kirk Cousins. So he can't just be like, if he does exactly what Jimmy Butler does, because he's clearly not the personality of Jimmy Butler, even when you kind of stretch things to the extremes. So yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know what Cousins could do. As for like who would be on the team, by the way, for people who like don't understand, this is a very weird and kind of long story, but like Jimmy Butler.
This is going to be good, folks.
Yeah, so Jimmy Butler has like demanded a trade from the Wolves. The Wolves have attempted, I don't know, in good faith or not, to trade him, but nobody's matching the price because of course Jimmy Butler is like an all-star, and so the Wolves are kind of asking a lot. And like kind of the final pieces that they keep asking for, kind of the final straw for all these other teams to turn down. So Butler's been angry at the team for not trading him and not accepting these offers that have come in. And the team is like, well, you're under contract, and if we're going to get value out of you, we have to get value out of you. So Butler does end up reporting to practice, which is great. And then what's the word? He's very churlish. I'm just thinking of that Key and Peele sketch.
Yeah, let's go with that. Dude just started yelling while he was practicing, just yelling, "You need me," to both the team and the
I
ownership.
run this place.
I run this place.
Yeah, so maybe the most iconic story from this practice has to be that Jimmy Butler took like a team full of backups, and when they scrimmage against the starters minus him, and they like won. They cleaned up apparently. And Jimmy Butler had Cat in the post, and he's defending Cat, and at some point he yells that like Cat's not going to shoot this, or he can't handle me, or something like that, and of course he gets the ball and then he passes the ball out to Wiggins, which is like, yeah, why not? And after like the cleaning up with the group of backups is pretty incredible, considering like how awful the Timberwolves bench is. And after that, he goes on to like a CNN interview with Rachel Nichols, and he says there's like a players only meeting or something, and then he spoke up in the players only meeting, and then there's a whole drama about whether or not that ever happened, and there was like a bunch of players tweeting back and forth. Anyway, that's just to catch you up. He kind of just went crazy. It's a hilarious story. You can find it, of course, on The Athletic. But
subtle plug there, very subtle plug.
Well, I mean, John Krasinski is like, and Shams, who's also at the Athletic, is actually the one kind of like leading most of the reporting on the Jimmy Butler stuff. So it's not just a plug, but also it's a plug. As for like which player Jimmy Butler would be, that's like really weird. Like last year, before he was would have been like Alex Boone. Sorry, Blake. But this year, I don't know. Like, who's the most prideful player? I don't know. Diggs has a lot of swag, but he like probably wouldn't do that.
Diggs, it seems like it would have more sense than that, but you could look at like the Randy Moss return in 2010,
right? Yeah, that's definitely that.
But that was like a sliver to this door of a thing, like
right. Incredible.
There was this Twitter feed, or there was this Twitter thread that I had retweeted today about the most dysfunctional moments in Minnesota sports, and that whole thread just made me want to move. Like I couldn't. It just kept going. Everything from the Whizzinator to what was it, like from the Whizzinator to Gophers versus Michigan 2003, bilateral leg weakness. Yeah, just one gigantic mess. But in any case, I'm trying to think of any way that Kirk Cousins could actually offend everyone on the team at that level, and other than like just spending the next. Maybe wearing a bunch of Eagles gear? I don't know. Like, how does one upset everyone on the team like this, other than going off of their meds?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably like throws a bunch of interceptions and then blames everyone else for it.
Anthony Barr, who's not having a great season so far and has been called out thus far so far this season. What if he ended up just blaming his terrible season on everyone else on the defense, Harrison Smith included, and then just started to do digs on the offense and just started like slowly rant and like ramp up everything, and then just started missing practices and started like missing games because like there's your option. There's your possibility.
Yeah.
I don't think Kirk Cousins could do anything in that van that would cause everyone to wow.
right.
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. Also from Luke Braun, he asks, given the quality of opponent, should we expect to see a game plan focused on controlling the clock, i.e. significantly more running snaps than in previous weeks? Or is Zim going to pull a Peterson/Marone and pedal to the metal to keep the other team on its toes?
No, I mean, I think that, well, first, I think Zim's just going to defer to DeFilippo. I mean, he's like had his share of like interfering with the offense, and it sounds like whenever he talks about it, he like regrets it. So I don't think that there's going to be kind of that approach to it. Like he might say, hey, we want to be aggressive here, but he'll kind of like leave things up to Flip. Flip has been historically like a very pass heavy coach. But it's also like difficult to tell, right? Because he was like with the Cleveland Browns who like needed to pass to catch up. Plus they had like 3 injuries to running backs and they converted their fullback to running back. And, you know, so they had to pass, right? So it's difficult to tell. But even when you count for like game situation, it seems like he passes the ball more than he runs. I don't think that we're going to see a ton of it. I mean, the tidbit that we got from Blake Murphy was that we might see a bunch of like passes that are functionally runs, like screens and stuff like that. Dalvin Cook kind of excels at that. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see a kind of a return to we want to limit the number of drives, we want to run the ball and kind of avoid turnovers and stuff like that kind of game.
Yeah. Next question is from Alex Goebel, who says, given that the Cardinals are starting a rookie quarterback, do you think there'll be any parallels between their offensive game script and what the Buffalo Bills ran against us?
Maybe. So the game plan that seems like it would work best against the Cardinals is kind of the game plan that the Bills used against the Vikings. Tons of screens, moving pockets to try and kind of shake coverages and stuff like that and simplify reads and so on. As for kind of what the Cardinals did, it sounds like, based off of what we're hearing, that like despite McCoy's like history of like adapting offenses, like with like Tim Tebow and stuff like that, that he's just going to do what he does. And so I don't think we'll see a ton of the same stuff that we saw work so well in the Bills game. Plus, you have the added element that when you've got, Josh Allen rolling out, when you've got Josh Allen, reading defensive ends and stuff like that, he's just the best athlete aside from Lamar Jackson, but Lamar's not playing right now, quarterback in his draft class. Rosen can move a little bit, but I mean, there's a reason he had negative rushing yards in college, which it's because college counts sacks as rushes, but they're not going to put him in the same situations that Josh Allen was put in. If it's going to be screens, I think that the Vikings are going to be better against screens in this game than they were against the Bills. A, because of like kind of regression, but B, it seems like the defense has tightened up a little bit.
Next question is from Noah, who asks, seems like the Vikings took a big step backwards this year in maintaining coverage assignments, particularly with slot receivers. How much of this is related to replacing Newman with Alexander?
Yeah, I think that that's a pretty good kind of causal reason for why the nickel cornerback has struggled. And what's interesting is like the biggest miscommunication failures between a nickel and a linebacker are actually not on the slot receivers. They happen with tight ends. They happen with running backs. To bring it back to the Buffalo game, the Jason Kroom touchdown, the Chris Ivory 55-yard gain, both of those were miscommunications with a linebacker and a nickel corner, but didn't involve a slot receiver. And I think not having Newman there is pretty impactful. And it's not just Mackenzie Alexander. Mike Hughes has also been making mistakes. It seems like Mac has been making more mistakes. The snap count has been decreasing. That there's the last game snap count is probably an anomaly because we saw a bunch of safeties in there, and I think a lot of that has to do with 2 tight end sets. But for the most part, it's not just Mackenzie Alexander, although maybe the bigger problem is when it is Mackenzie Alexander. So yeah, that's part of it. Part of it might also be, kind of what Zimmer said himself, was that he's kind of just putting in too many kind of complicated coverage rules in there and creating confusion on his own end of things. So I think it's a combination of all these things, but certainly not having Newman has hurt.
Question from Kenneth Allen, who asks, if you could either have A, no more questions from Don from Ohio, or B, a loss by the Eagles tonight where Carson Wentz looks like the worst quarterback in the league, which would you take?
It looks like I'm not getting the second one. But if I could, yeah, of course I would take that. Yeah. I mean, it would be nice not to have more harassment from Don. And it is harassment. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. But it's Carson Wentz. It's like my enemy now. It's when you have a rivalry, but the other team doesn't know it.
No, we covered this on a previous Norse Code where at least Carson Wentz knows who you are.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, he does. But I can't imagine he's on the sideline thinking about, I showed Arif.
No, that's Trubisky.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Where like I'm watching a game and I see Carson Wentz and I'm like, Carson Wentz. But Carson Wentz, he's at a game. He's probably just thinking about like, Wendell Smallwood sucks in pass protection.
Next question is from Aaron the Best, who asks, should all candy corn be melted and used as fertilizer and or thrown into space where it belongs? You want to cover this with your love of non-waxy candy corn? I feel like we get this every year.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't like it when people bring up candy corn questions because it just reminds me of my failure to deliver the candy corn I promised to the followers that asked for candy corn from me when I said I could get it to them. Some of them did receive it. I will say that. A few did not, and that's my fault, and I'm sorry. But
the season of apologetic Arif.
Right. I promised to do something. I didn't do it. And it's not like writing an article. I could just put it up the next day. It's like it's been years, right? But I will say this about candy corn. One, most of the candy corn you eat is trash. Maybe you can send it to the moon or whatever, right? Two, homemade candy corn is amazing. It's made kind of in a similar way that you make marshmallows and stuff. But yeah, it's a mallow thing, I think, is kind of what it's – well, thing is not in the name, but it's a mallow something. There's actually a really good Good Eats episode about making your own candy corn. And on a lark, Chelsea and I tried it, and we were like, oh, this is good? Okay, cool. And we ate more of it. We made more of it. We ate more of it. But yeah, it's homemade candy corn is like really good, but it's I'm not defending store-bought candy corn. Which
not defending
is literally made of wax.
Yes.
Yeah. Which it's food grade wax. It's not the same thing, but it's fun to say. It's made of wax for real.
For reals, yo. Final question from Bojack Norseman, who I swore I should.
Great name.
I should have come up with that. I'm really upset I didn't. Who asks, what's the worst non-fatal injury you've ever sustained? Considering that all of your injuries so far have been non-fatal.
Right. I did point out to him when he asked the question, it's like, well, I haven't had a fatal injury. So worst non-fatal injury I've sustained, probably in the fourth grade. It was, what else would it be? It was a knee injury. I was playing Foursquare. I must have told this story before on Norse Code, but it's been a while, so I'll tell it again. I was playing Foursquare, and it was on asphalt. And you've been to Grand Forks, Benjamin Franklin Elementary School. That asphalt is like not pleasant. It's not like cemented out. It's like rocky and gravelly and just awful.
Still is, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Cool. Despite what people think, North Dakota actually invests a ton of money in education. This is just kind of one area where maybe they could do a little bit better.
They don't believe in smooth blacktop. That is something they don't believe in. Yes.
Yeah. It toughens us up. Historically tough person to reef us on, coming from North Dakota.
Got that North Dakota tough thing going.
Yeah, he's got the North Dakota toughness. But yeah, we were playing Foursquare, and I can't believe they just let us play whatever on this like just awful blacktop. And as you would expect, I'm like super competitive about it, and I go to my knees wearing shorts, and I just like tear like the skin off of my kneecap. You can see it. And I probably, in retrospect, did tear a ligament because I couldn't walk for like weeks afterward. But yeah, and so like because it's asphalt, I've got like all this dirt in my knee, so I've like pre-rubbed dirt into it, right? But yeah,
you should have been able to walk it off at that point if you rubbed dirt on it.
I should have just been able to walk it off because it had dirt rubbed into it already. But like it was so bad that like my classmates lifted me up. Which, first of all, imagine how much like classmates hate like this know-it-all, snarky, sarcastic Arif in the 4th grade. It was so bad that they were like, well, gotta take care of him. And so they carried me to the nurse's office. And the nurse was like, wow, you need to go to a doctor. And I was like, yeah, but recess is like almost over. Can you like take care of this?
Like, don't you have like a bandage or something for this? Like,
yeah, right. I was like, no, I gotta go back, man. I was the ace, right? I was winning. I was winning Foursquare. You gotta go back. And this is also like, this is like malpractice, right? She just like sighed and poured hydrogen peroxide on it to clean it out.
Well, it had to get cleaned out.
Yeah, right. So instead of like saying, calling my mom, being like, you gotta go to the doctor's office for this like torn knee, she just like sighed and poured hydrogen peroxide on it and like wrapped it up and sent me out there. And I couldn't walk. I don't know why I thought I was going to play Foursquare after it. And so I was basically just on one leg for like weeks. We never went to a doctor. That's
this probably explains a lot.
Yeah. That, I'm going to say that's why I fell on the asphalt 20 years later. I still have the scar on my knee.
Well, you would have to at that point if you lost that much skin on it. Yeah, that would totally make sense.
Yeah.
I've probably told the story on the show before, but I decided to do something nice for my then girlfriend, and it then proceeded to cost me dearly. She didn't like the whole like turning 31 or something. 32, so I got this like, it was February, and for her birthday I threw a small surprise party with some of her friends, and we went sledding. And it was quite cold. It was at night, and I brought these like sleds out, and one of those really thin like paper thin ones that are just like the roll up kind. They're useless. They provide nothing in the way. You're better off just riding down the hill on your butt. Like, you get nothing from this thing, but it was there. And we were just about finished. I was walking across the top of the dike, and I stepped on the useless thing, and my knee and ankle went in one direction, and I went in the other. And I thought I had broken my leg because it just all of a sudden it just like pow. I'm on the ground. I'm on the top of the dike, and I'm feeling around because I can't feel my knee all of a sudden, and I'm feeling for like any bone like sticking out because it felt that bad. It felt like a gunshot, and nothing was sticking out. And I was like, okay, well, I can't bend my knee. And the hospital here isn't going to airlift you from the top of a dike, so how the hell am I getting down? These are the things you have to think about in the moment. Like, I had a couple of friends up there. I was like, well, how the hell am I getting into the hospital? So we proceed to put me into this kind of like toboggan thing, and I was holding my leg up in the air like by the pants, so that my leg wasn't bending or it wasn't going to like get hurt. Because if this toboggan flipped over, I was screwed. I would have destroyed more of my knee. And my buddy rode down behind me on his butt and was holding on to the sled to make sure that I didn't fall out or anything, and tried to like dig his heels in to slow it down. And he was successful in that. I did make it down. That part was actually kind of fun. The sliding down, holding my leg up by the pants to prevent destroying my knee. And the humiliating part was getting dragged in the actual like toboggan over to where the cars were parked, because I wasn't walking this one off. And we made it to the hospital, and I hadn't destroyed anything terribly, but the MRI had said that I had lost a whole lot of my meniscus in my knee. and they were debating they were debating shaving it off, or they were debating having me keep it, and that was fine. I had just done a severe ankle sprain and a severe knee sprain, and had destroyed destroyed part of the meniscus in my knee, and they decided against surgery. I just couldn't really walk on it for about 3 months. And me, 6'5", 350 pounds at the time, I was having to go around in a wheelchair for a little while in like February.
Jesus.
In North Dakota. This was not okay. North Dakota is very ADA compliant. However, you can only do that to a certain point when you're riding around in a gigantic wheelchair in the snow. On the plus side, I was playing darts at the bar for a while and winning, because nobody thought the guy. Well, yeah, nobody thought the guy who was sitting in the wheelchair was going to be any good at darts. You're like, why is the guy in the wheelchair challenging you to the game? I feel like he would only challenge you if he knew he was going to win. Anyway.
Yeah, you should. Did you run a hustle at least?
I did for a little while. It was great. It was paying for my drinks. I didn't have to take a lot of pain pills, because I was getting a bunch of free drinks at the bar from people who didn't know not to play me in darts while I was sitting in my gigantic wheelchair. It was fantastic. So that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. If you have enjoyed the show, you can donate to us in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/Norse Code, or you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code and donate there. Arif, what do you have to plug for us today?
Well, I've got a piece up at The Athletic that breaks down the 5 most impactful plays from the Vikings perspective. I think 3 offensive plays and 2 defensive plays. Obviously, the Linval fumble is in there. It's got to be 3 defensive plays and 2 offensive plays. And break it down schematically and so on, and kind of demonstrate how it happened. And then I'll also have a Cardinals preview, which, if you listened last week to the show with Michael Kist, I used a lot of the fodder from the show to help craft this article. Thank you, Michael. And I'll be doing kind of the same thing here, so you can you've already previewed that Cardinals article.
Sounds good. That is going to be it for this episode. Again, New York City, Manhattan, bar none, Thursday, October 18th, we will be doing the live taping. If you find yourself in the Manhattan area or in the New York area, please check us out. We will have some swag for everyone for free. So that is it for us. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to tweet that, even if it is a work in progress. And we will see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.